Republicans attacking Democrats on crime. It's a strategy we hear in the 2020s, but for those of you who grew up in the 1980s, you may remember it as well. In the next installment of Red, Purple, and Blue, a sea change in Florida politics, we're going back to the late 80s when crime dominated two big elections, and we look at a future presidential candidate making a splash in the Sunshine State. In the 1988 presidential election, Republican Vice President George H.W. Bush attacked his opponent, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis, for vetoing a bill that would have eliminated a furlough program in Massachusetts prisons.
His revolving door prison policy gave weekend furloughs to first-degree murderers.
And it was an ad by an independent group that referenced one man, William Horton, who became much talked about during the campaign.
He allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
But 2 years earlier, in Florida's 1986 gubernatorial election, Republican candidate Bob Martinez also attacked his opponent for being against the death penalty and being a liberal. And the strategy worked. In the election, Martinez destroyed the Democrat South Florida coalition, winning Miami-Dade and Palm Beach counties, and also rallied the Republican base in Southwest Florida. Cubans heavily supported Martinez, especially after siding so heavily with Reagan over Carter in 1980. Along with strengthening land conservation and business ties, Martinez attracted middle-class voters with his statewide anti-crime, anti-drug campaign. But he's most known for what was the death of his political career, the service tax. Florida depended on sales tax for 3/4 of its revenue. The economy slowed in the late 80s, so a consumption tax, at a time of less consumption, didn't do much. A bipartisan commission was appointed to implement a service tax when Martinez was inaugurated. So it was implemented. Then the same year, in September 1987, he said he made a mistake and then supported its repeal. So he supported something unpopular, then quickly changed his position. Now you fast forward to 1990, and Martinez is vulnerable.
I want to be your governor, so together we can get Florida back on track.
Lawton Chiles would eventually be his Democratic opponent. Before that, he ran for U.S. Senate in 1970.
He sat down, my brother and I, neither one of us will ever forget this discussion. He said, I'm gonna do a $10 donation for my campaign, a sawbuck. And we were always very, very active in the campaigns, and we knew what that meant, in terms of, okay, how are you gonna fund a campaign? It, again, was one of those great things, because if you gave him $10, you had skin in the game. He was your guy.
He became popular by crisscrossing the state, on foot.
And walked from the northwest tip of Florida all the way down to the Keys.
His nickname?
Walking Lawton.
He won in 1970 and then won re-election for U.S. Senate twice. And despite health issues, taking Prozac for depression, and his age, he was asked to run for governor in 1990 against Martinez.
He had been in government for 30-something years at that point in time. He knew the state intimately.
And he won easily, but Republicans won seats in the legislature and finally had split control over the state Senate. It's likely, even by Martinez's admission, that the 1990 election wasn't a story of Democratic dominance.
The people of Florida have faced the largest tax increase in history.
It was a story about the service tax. Chiles came into a recession, then had to deal with the destruction from Hurricane Andrew, and it was a difficult first term with a split legislature. But he extracted as much as he could from them.
His biggest goal as governor was health care, to try to provide more access. And that was something where he had some real successes with community health care purchasing alliances. He just knew, after his 30 years in public office, that there was no more important place to spend a dollar than to making sure that moms were healthy and babies were born healthy, because that's a generational thing if it goes wrong.
Meanwhile, Jeb Bush moved from Texas to Miami-Dade County in the 1980s. He served briefly as a Republican as Florida's Secretary of Commerce in the 1980s before serving on his father's, George H.W. Bush's, campaign in 1988. Bush ran for governor as a Republican in 1994 and promised to, quote, dismantle the welfare state.
My partner Armando Codina and I built a business from the ground up. 3 people. Today that business has 160 people. Unlike government that just kind of grows and grows and grows, we had ups and downs. The real world is that way. You haven't been in the real world. You haven't been in the private sector to know what it's like.
This young newcomer would give the governor the election campaign of his life. Now, Republican Jeb Bush ran a hard-hitting campaign against Democratic Governor Lawton Chiles in 1994, calling Chiles an ultra-liberal and weak on crime. But Bush made a few key mistakes while his opponent delivered a line still remembered in Tallahassee. On next week's episode, I give you the inside story of the 1994 governor's race in Florida in Red, Purple, and Blue, a sea change in Florida politics. It airs every Sunday at 6 and 10 p.m. right here on SNN. And you can also watch the episodes on our website. Just go to snntv.com, hover over politics, or hover over news rather, and click on politics.